and then people can come in, but I'm excited to be with you today on this journey. So if you don't know who I am, my name is Amanda Buchanan, and just a little bit of background about how I ended here. So I was in ministry, did some international work in my early 20s. Then I went to Tyndale, studied psychotherapy, and then in that got exposed to like preaching and leadership development. So my interest expanded more broadly than that. So I ended up taking a pastoral role of discipleship in a congregation that was about like 600 to 800 in Kingston, Ontario. And I was a pastor of discipleship, and discipleship is all about change. So I got really the best of both worlds to be able to do the spiritual stuff, but also my psychotherapy training really came in handy. I also got a coach when I started to pastor, and this was transformative for me. I got to work with someone who helped me be thoughtful about the kind of leader I was becoming and to be more intentional with the type of change I was making in my life and in my ministry. And then this actually led to a lead pastor role in Hamilton, Ontario, of a church that had come out of a massive crisis. It was no one's ideal. I certainly was not fighting for this role, but the Lord made it really clear that this was his next call for me. And in that, I really got to see how organizational health and leadership health is really important in navigating not only crisis, but change. And so I became really passionate about this. And about a year ago, I launched into my own, now I'm coaching full time. I work with organizations and leaders to navigate change, transition, or become the best and healthiest versions of themselves. This is why I love coaching, because one of the things I'll say for myself, I find in pastoring, sometimes well-intentioned, we make an entire group of people, whether congregants, staff, or volunteers, dependent on us and our expertise. If we're really honest, if anyone has had seminary training, sometimes you graduate and they're like, you're the expert, go. And it can make it hard for you to all of a sudden step into ministry and we realize no one ever taught us how to do a budget. Can I ask for help? Right? What kind of leader am I going to be? What kind of practices do I need in my life to help sustain my ministry? So I actually intentionally, when I was lead pastoring, I actually led from a coaching approach. So I stopped trying to be the one with all the answers and intentionally shifted to learning how to ask good questions. Because if we're in ministry because we believe Ephesians 4, like we're equipping the saints for ministry, the purpose is that the saints discover for themselves what they carry. Okay? So this is kind of how I'm giving you a little bit of a coaching pitch. Now, before I get into you, I want to talk to you about stats on transition. We're going to talk about, I'm going to help you navigate personal and organizational. So just out of curiosity, how many people are here because they're navigating a personal change or are interested in that dynamic? Okay. And then how many people are here because they're navigating maybe an organizational change and they're curious about that? Okay, I'll be both hands. This is great because we're going to do both. When I said I had 45 minutes, here we go. So people experience, studies show a major transition every 12 to 18 months. But interestingly enough, 53% of those changes are outside of our control, and about 47% are chosen. So I think it is about a 50-50 split, but it errs on the side of like we don't oftentimes choose the change that's happening to us. So that's a note about personal change. Organizational change, stats that came out this year. 96% of organizations are going through some sort of change. 96%. But despite people's best efforts, oftentimes 34% of major change initiatives are successful. 34%. So that means 60 to 70% fail. Okay, so for those of you who just waved your hands for organizational change, pay attention. And this is mainly due to employee resistance and an absence of managerial support. So what I mean by that is it's people. The reason a lot of change doesn't go successfully is because of people. Most change focuses on strategy and logistics and where we're going and budget, but leaders oftentimes struggle to address the human side of change, the emotional side of change. Okay? The other thing worth noting, even positive change creates disruption. Even if it's change you pick and you know it's in a good direction. I'll give you an example. I got married in my mid-30s. There was a lot of disruption. I picked it. We picked it. We wanted to get married, but I will not lie to you. In our engagement, we talked about what we would grieve. leaving behind being single. And I'll walk you through some of those transitions. So one of the phrases I want to kind of just highlight to you is this, I'm sure you've heard it, is like you can take Israel out of Egypt, but you can't take Egypt out of Israel. So it's easy to do an external change. The internal stuff is often the harder work, okay? So my question for you is, let's talk about, just brainstorm with your partner, someone beside you, different types of personal change. So I'm going to give you about a minute to do it, just different types of personal change, okay? And I'm going to keep us moving. So just brainstorm a couple, we'll come together. Okay, let's bring it in. I said we're going to keep moving. So why don't we just call out different types of personal transitions or changes? Family? Can be more specific? Yep. Yep. Health challenges? Yep. Sorry? Neighbors? Yep. Sorry? Career change? Yep. Health change? Yep. Anything else? Pardon? Leadership change? Yep. Job change? Sorry? Retirement? Right? That's a change. Okay, so that's a lot of changes, right? And relationships is actually a lot of that. So we're going to do the same thing. Let's brainstorm again, partner, organizational changes. Okay, what are types of changes that happen within organizations besides we got a new boss? That's an obvious one. What kind of changes happen in organizations? Take a minute, just talk it through, and then we'll come together again. Do you mind if I use your phone for time? I just need to occasionally. I just need to be able to see it. Yeah, like if I could just touch it, and yeah, that's all. My phone's recording, so. Okay. What types of organizational changes can happen? Technology up, yeah. New systems and software. It's another one. Policy. People love that. Policy change. Yeah. Yeah. What else? Leadership change. Totally. Staffing change on that. Yep. What else? Yep. Yep. New employees. Restructuring. Yep. Any other type of change? Growth. Yep. And I'm going to link this one. Culture change can also happen. And I will say about culture change, if the senior leader isn't thinking about culture, no one is. And this is oftentimes one we miss. This is really important. So we're going to give some language to change and transition, because I think this is really important. It's how I like to distinguish between the two. Change is the external event or the situation. Transition is the emotional or psychological process we go through, right? So change, I had an event, I had a wedding. Okay, that's nice. Do I suddenly know how to live like a spouse when I've been on my own for so long? No, that's been a process, okay? We're going to try to use this language as we move through this topic today. And it's important, right? Going back to that phrase about it's easy to take Israel out of Egypt. There's this event. They get the Exodus, they get taken out. And then you realize, oh man, like after 2 or 3 years, Egypt is still, they do not see themselves as a free people. Then the Lord takes them on this journey, right? Around identity. Okay, so this is how we're going to think about change and transition. I'm going to introduce you to 3 different models. I'll probably just blow through the second one really quick, but I think this one is helpful. This helps with personal change, especially. It's just called the circle of control. Basically, going through change, you have to sit there and you go, what is in my control? What can I actually directly impact by thoughts, words, or actions? Then you have a larger circle, which is your influence. I may be able to have influence or modify, but I have no control of the outcome. And then the third one is a lot of things, to be honest, we spend our mental energy worrying about, but if we sit down and talk about it, we have no control over. So I'm going to give you a little coaching question out of this diagram. Where are you spending most of your energy? If I'm sitting there like with a client and we use this diagram, I'm going to say, where are you spending most of your energy? So it's just a good way to think about, okay, what can I actually control? And we dial it back in, okay? So this is like a very easy change model, if I can say good visual. I like the next one the Kubler-Ross change model. I'm not going to get too much into it, but I wanted to highlight this one for you because you will see in the change, this is all about emotions, okay? In fact, it might look like the stages of grief. You'll see some similarity there, like the shock, the denial, the frustration, the anger, and then eventually integration. This is going to clue in as to why when we have navigating change as a leader of an organization, if we are not clocked in to the realities of the emotions happening within our organization, we are not going to bring our people along with us. We're actually, I think, going to encounter some resistance. The third model, and this is where I'm going to coach you all through today, is the model I've picked called the Bridges Transition Model, and you can actually use this to navigate personal and organizational change, okay? And so I'm going to give you I would say I'm going to go through the three phases like at a high level, and then I'm actually going to coach you through all phases personally and coach you through all phases organizationally. When I said I had a big agenda, I'm aiming high today, okay? So I hope you walk away feeling like you just had from a fire hose. So first phase, you see the ending and the letting go. And then you're going to see the neutral zone, which when we talk about it, you'll realize there is nothing neutral about this phase. And then there's the new beginning. So let's get in a little more in depth into these phases. So the first one is the ending or the letting go. Okay, so my example that I gave you in my own life, positive change, chosen change. I'm getting married, okay? We talked about the end of singleness, and one of the things, like, what are you going to miss the most about being single? The quickness at which decisions are made is basically was both of ours. Now, the reason that this is helpful personally to identify is because sometimes what someone is grieving losing explains later on when you're trying to adapt behavior. Oh, if we haven't named this, when I'm trying to make decisions on my own and my husband's like, why are you leaving it? Okay, this was tough for both of us, right? So it's helpful to name at the beginning, like what you are losing. And I want to say, remember that this is change is the event. Like I'm changing my paperwork, I'm changing my name, I'm mentally being like, I'm a spouse now. But the transition and the dance of learning how to do that, that's going to happen over the process. So that's like a chosen change, okay? And we have the next neutral zone. I actually, someone called this the messy middle. I think that's a better name for it. When you're in the middle, you can see from the dip here that actually, they say productivity, but even morale is pretty low. And this is true personally and organizationally. We've left, this is what I'm talking about the liminal space, we're using spiritual language. We've left what we know. We can't go back, but we don't know yet what the new normal looks like. So there is a lot of anxiety in this phase. A lot of anxiety. Okay, I'm going to give you an example. Israel on the peninsula of the Red Sea, right, says to Moses, the Egyptians are coming after him, it was better back in Egypt. There is even a tendency to idealize the thing that you left, which might be okay if maybe that change wasn't chosen. You might not have chosen to leave the good thing. But if it was bad, sometimes we can even go back and be like, wow, that was a really good, no, because it's familiar. We don't yet know what the new normal looks like. So the internal, if we're going to talk about like a marital example, making like financial decisions, you're like, okay, how big of a purchase do we need to talk about? We're learning to talk those things through. And there can be anxiety. Even I remember when my husband and I went to the bank to like, okay, we're going to make you like a joint member on our account. And we just had this moment where we're like, we saved up all this and now we just get to put your name on it and then you get access to it. We had a moment where both of us had this, we're like, oh man, we confess like becoming one, and then right, the emotional and the psychological process. I know, thank goodness I was a coach because we were talking about this, my poor husband. Anyway, so then the third phase is new beginnings. Okay, so we have new identities that emerge, starting to see new practices, new behaviors, and oftentimes still you're going to see energy start to come back. Okay, because you start to imagine the future instead of the past that you left behind. So, does anyone have any questions on that? Is that pretty clear? Hopefully.
Explain the new values.
Well, the things that are important to you coming out. Yeah. Do you have a question?
Well, just it's interesting that this is a transition model. The other models usually are change models. Some of the language you're using here is also change. So you see change and transition within both.
Yeah. Well, and it's because I wanted to use different visuals, and I felt it helpful to do change and transition, but those models aren't, like, I didn't modify the language. But you're always navigating those both, right? Because there's going to be a tendency, even in your own personal transition, to get maybe functional about the process, right? You're talking about, like, how am I going to make, let's say, job change? How am I going to make money? And it's all the external stuff, and you might not deal with any of the emotional stuff. Someone else might deal with all the emotional stuff, and I'm processing, like, grieving, and then not being like, right, where is this going to end up? Like, how am I going to pay my bills, right? So we're navigating both of those things. So now I'm going to take you back through these models again, and I want you to think about, let's go back. So I have some sticky notes. You can also write it down if you don't have paper, but if you're going to get, I would encourage you to, I'm going to just hand these out. You're going to have to write some stuff down in the next process. If you can just take one or two or three maybe. Now, I know some of you said you were in here for organizational change, but you're actually going to get to be a better leader if we start with the personal change, because we have to deal with the emotions. So what I'd like you to do on your sticky note is I want you to think about a change that is occurring in your life or maybe has occurred in your life. And I want you to write that change down on the sticky note. And because they're small, maybe it's a piece of paper you have too. Write the change. And then I want you to think of the emotions that are coming up as you think about this change. You don't need to talk about a thing. I just want you to think about what's coming up. And because I am going to divide you into groups, I do need you to come with a change. And if you cannot think of any change, think of someone else's change. Because if you're not going through one, likely someone you know and care about is. And this will be helpful as you support them. So just think of that change and write it down.
So emotions could be positive and negative.
Yeah. Now, as you're thinking about this change, let's talk about the type of emotions that come up in stage one, because you're going to need to let go. There is an ending there. So what kind of emotions are coming up? I know, but ask people to talk about emotions in a group. Yeah.
Relief.
Relief, okay, yep. Relief, what else? Sorry? Sadness, yep. Sorry, someone over here? Anger. Uncertainty, yep.
And hope.
Hope, yep. Anxious, yep. Regret. Second guessing. Letting go, yep. Sometimes there's denial, especially if the change wasn't chosen. Let's say someone like fired you, right? Can't believe this has happened. Also, sometimes a bit of nostalgia. Culture shock, yep. Shock is oftentimes part of this too. And I would say probably at all points, as you're going to encounter this sense of loss of identity or loss of control, right? It's coming, whether either you picked it or you didn't. Change is coming. So I'll just summarize. We had grief, resistance, sadness, anger, some hope, some relief, loss of identity, difficult emotions. Now imagine you're navigating change as your organization and you never deal with these emotions. Okay, so let's think about the second phase. Okay, so you're in the neutral zone. Now, some of you might have to imagine, or maybe as we're talking, you're like, oh, I think I might be here because I feel very. So think about an emotion. You're in the neutral zone. You can't go back. You don't yet know what the new normal looks like. The messy middle.
Aimless or lost?
Yep, aimless or lost. Yeah. Untethered. Yep. It's another one.
Adaption?
Yep, adaption. Confusion. Pain. Yeah. Rejection. Ambiguity. Right?
Is it all negative? Because I'm thinking maybe it's a motivation to keep moving out because of all of that.
Yeah, it could be motivational. They actually say sometimes this phase, is a good question, can be the phase where a lot of innovation starts to happen and experimentation because you're forced to be different, right? Like I was in this career and then I lost my job and now I have to make ends meet and maybe you don't have the time to discern and all of a sudden you're going, oh, maybe I could try this or maybe I have to do this. So there's an openness, forced, I would say in some cases, but also we say sometimes desperation is a seed for creativity. So this phase actually, there can be a lot of innovation. Again, I'm going to circle back at the end organizationally. I think leaders sometimes can really use this phase to ask some good questions about the way things were and whether they should continue. But that's also the same personally. There may be some things that worked before that might not work in the future. Okay, so let's look at the last phase, thinking of that change that you have in your minds. The potential of imagining a new beginning. I know some of you might be like, I'm in the middle of it. I can't even imagine. I'm not even there, and that's fine. We'll let other people speak for you. So maybe some of you are coming out of a change. You can already imagine what emotions would be there.
There's expectation.
Mm-hmm.
Hope.
Yep, hope.
There's fear.
There can be fear. Yep. What does this now look like? Yep.
Steadiness?
Yep. Like finally a sense of we kind of know, yeah. A bit more security. Relief. Yep. Joy. Yep.
But there's an uncertainty because you're stepping forward into this new thing.
Yep.
And you don't know what you don't know yet.
Totally. Yep. There's uncertainty.
Freedom.
Yeah.
Excitement.
Fun, excitement. You'll probably see, regardless of the emotions, an increase in energy. They might be strong emotions, what we've just labeled, but likely an increase in energy. Yeah.
How about proof of concept?
Proof. Oh, say more.
So just so that you're stepped into it, you're now in your new beginnings, you're kind of getting out of the neutral zone, and you've just had your first little success.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's proof of concept.
Yep.
Something you did work.
Yes.
And you took a risk and it rewarded you. And it was only a little success.
Yep.
Everyone else might say, oh, that's just a little thing. No, it's huge to you because you took the risk and you got rewarded.
Totally.
So proof of concept.
Yeah, that's a great. And I would even say this is where just remember we go back and forth in between the phases, right? We experiment maybe around here, try something, oh, didn't work, fall back, tried something, worked, go up, right? So it's not as linear as we're making it out, which is why I like the curve.
Right.
Okay.
Also be a sense of loss in there.
Oh.
Because with a new beginning, you value, there may be some that are not aligned with that in the organization. And so you see other transitions happening.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. Even again, if it's good change.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
I say recognition, how God is in
Mm-hmm.
this transition.
Yep.
Recognition in the transition.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's important. I think that's why oftentimes God calls Israel to remembrance, right? Because you have to remember where we've been in order to understand, integrate that. And that's some of the point. So think of all the emotions we've just said. And then we just heard that most leaders aren't helping navigate emotions, right? So what I'm going to do, okay, so I am going to also coach you in how to coach, okay? Because I know there is a bunch of ministry leaders in the room and shepherds, and you're going to want to give answers, and you're going to want to comment, and you're going to want to provide advice. Yeah, thank you, Judy. You are not allowed to do that in this context, okay? You are to be a good listener, ask questions, do not offer advice, because the understanding of coaching is that the person, they've lived their life, they've developed skills, and we want to pull that out of them as you sit and talk together, okay? I'm gonna give the initial question, do not worry, okay? I also want to say, just for the sake of, maybe it goes without saying, we're going to just trust that every conversation you have is confidential so people can be honest, okay? What gets talked about in the circle stays in the circle, okay? And then really good, just to pay attention, just listen for your own assumptions or anything that you might, when you're thinking about patterns or needing clarity, those are questions, okay? So, thinking back to that personal change. And I'm going to give you there's 3 or 4 people in a group, so I'm going to give you about 4 minutes. That's about a minute a person. And you're going to answer honestly, what do I need to let go of? Or what am I afraid of losing? And let every person just say, and you're going to sit with them in that statement. And you can ask, hey, what do you mean by that? Or why is that hard for you? Because you may listen and be like, man, that wouldn't be hard for me to let go of whatever. It's like, okay, you're just going to sit with the group in that. And you can ask more questions, but just give each other about a minute each so that we can keep moving through the phases, okay? Okay, and go. Okay. We can bring it, just turn to the front for a second. You can stay in your seat, it's fine. Okay, so I'm just gonna ask you to step back from what you just talked about. And you don't need to share anything, but how was that to sit and just hear from someone what they need to let go of in order to change? How did it feel to sit with other people and hear what they needed to let go of to change? Or they were going to change? Inclusive? You're not alone? Yeah, it felt sacred space, I like to say. Yeah, special. You could identify. There's a sense of solidarity. Yeah. You could relate. Yeah, it's pretty sacred space. I am giving you a speed coaching session. Normally I'd sit with in an hour and do this with someone, but it's really sacred space, especially when people are being so honest about even the emotions of the thing that they're going to let go of. So I'm going to give you, here's a coaching question for take home. If some of you are sitting here, okay, you can write this down. No, we're going to keep going. Yeah. But I didn't want to leave people like, great, now I'm here and I don't know. So I'm going to give you a coaching question. Okay. You've let go of other things in the past, or you've also grieved. What did you do then that will help you get through now? Okay, so you've had to let go. This is not the first time you've lost something or you let go of something or you were afraid of losing something. So look back on your history, because we're not children, so we have some history. What did you do then that you can now take into this phase? Okay, so that's a coaching question. It's personal reflection for you. I didn't want to leave you sitting here. For those of you who are like, this is where I am, okay? Everyone got that? Okay, so now we're going to do the second phase. For some of you, you might have to imagine, or maybe you're discovered, I'm here today, and I actually realize I'm right in the middle of phase 2. So the question I want you to answer, which is kind of weird, we're just getting clarity about lack of clarity, right? What feels unclear or unsettled right now? Or sometimes if people are on the end, you might also be like, remember we talked about innovation? What's possible? You might be kind of on the end of the phase. What's possible now that wasn't possible before when you were tangled up in that first phase or in your old job or whatever that is? So you kind of pick which question resonates with you And we're going to do the same thing again. You're going to take a minute and you're going to just share. Okay, what feels unclear or unsettled, you choose which one, or what is possible now that was not possible before. And I'll just keep track of the time. Okay, same rules apply. Go ahead. Okay, just for the sake of time, I'm going to keep moving us. So for those of you who are in this phase, you're like, this is totally me. I'm going to give you 2 hints. One, the circle of control that I showed you earlier, the circle of influence. Okay, that's actually a really good exercise for you because in uncertainty, you really got to name what you actually can control and what you can't. So that would be a good exercise. Another question I have found helpful in this phase is, how do you want to show up in this uncertainty? Or who do you want to be in this uncertainty? Because you get to choose that. Okay, so how do you want to show up, or who do you want to be? If you're in this phase, that, especially what we heard this morning with the power of the Spirit, the presence of God, we have all that we need. There might be a lot of questions, right? So that's a great question. Circle of control, or how do you want to be in this uncertainty? How do you want to show up? Who do you want to be? Any variation of that question. So now we'll coach through the third phase, okay? So now think of what you've been talking about. What new identity or new reality is emerging? For some of you, you might not even be here. Well, I suspect sometimes people who are attracted to anchor or apostolic tend to be a little more visionary, think outside the box. It might not be too far for you to be like, hey, I'm in the middle of change, but I could imagine a bunch of different possibilities. I can't rush the process. So if you're not there yet, allow yourself to dream a little bit, okay? So 4 minutes, go. Okay, let's pull it all together. Okay, so if you're in this phase, you're not out of the woods. So it's really, this last question, if this is you. Pardon? That's right. Okay, so here is the question. What behaviors, habits, or thoughts need to change in order to support this new beginning? What behaviors, patterns, thoughts, right, need to change to support this new beginning? Because even, like, I'll give you an example of my own transition. It used to be ministry, right? And I remember when I was praying about coaching and starting coaching, I said to the Lord, I feel like I need to change the way I work. I don't have to, because I would just put my head down and plow through everything. That's right. And I just said, I think the Lord said, I'm going to teach you a new way to work. That is a whole intentional process. We were thinking, is what worked for me before going to work now? The Lord wants to keep building in you, right? You need different roots. You need different trellis. Some people call it a rule of life. That's something I coach through. But what's going to sustain this new thing that God is doing? It's a really important. And some of those old narratives are going to come up, right? So you really got to know what's going to come at you. So now that we've talked about this, for those of you sitting in the room, have you had some clarity about which phase you're in? Yeah? I know where you are? Okay.
Question though.
Yeah.
In knowing where we are.
Yeah.
Within an organizational context, can you make application to?
I'm about to get to that.
Okay.
I didn't, because I was like, we're just a little bit over time, but I want to go quickly through if you're leading an organization, if I can even count your family as an organization. Do you see how many emotions and processes are in this personally? Yeah. And even in an organization, it's filled with people. And it would be really easy for us to be like, here's the new strategy. We're going to reach 1,500 people by this amount and not talk about the new things that need to happen and the things that people are going to leave behind, okay? So we're just going to give you some high-level stuff to think about leading. I think it's really important, okay? So I'm going to ask basically in every phase, what is the kind of leadership that is needed in each phase? So we're talking about change, right? I want to be really clear with this. Change is messy, and sometimes in change, we want to offer clarity before it's possible. The importance about leadership in change, especially in a crisis, if I can say that, is that we do not run to clarity ahead of when we have it. And that can be really tempting because people will want it from us. Just tell us where we're going. And they won't, especially if we're in discipleship, we will not let them do the work themselves or allow the Lord to do the work in them. We're going to want to just give it to them. So it requires a really emotionally and spiritually mature leader to lead change well. So I'm going to say this, you're leading transition. Don't pretend certainty. I'm not going to lie to you. When I was in the middle of this crisis with the congregation, I got up in the first AGM and I said, so I could have come to this organization and I could have painted shutters on this house and I could have put a whole new front porch on. But there's some rot in the basement that I'm dealing with right now. And if I don't spend time down there dealing with the structural stuff to sustain what God's doing, we are not going to have a house to hang our shutter in front of. And they were just kind of like, oh, okay. Do you see? I was clear and not clear. I didn't tell them exactly what I was dealing with. There was a lot of unhealth at the organizational level. They kind of understood this is why everything's kind of looking the same. Like we hired her and nothing's really changing, but me and the leadership team working. So you can still be clear without being specific. And you can even just say, I'm anxious. I don't know where this is going to go. But naming some of those emotions, and most of you are leading, know that sometimes leadership is just calling out what's in the room, right? So you think of all those personal emotions we've just named. Some people just need you to name it for them. I know you're anxious. I know you need to grieve. Maybe you do a solemn assembly, if we're going to use some biblical terms, right? What are you modeling as a leader in your transition? One other note on this first phase, where you're encountering resistance, if you're a leader and you're running into resistance, that's oftentimes a place that needs addressing for the grieving, right? We talked about that earlier. What I have to let go of, it's like the tighter we hold on, right? The Lord needs to we can just open our hands. So we're leading people through the letting go. And that requires a lot of patience, okay? So let's talk about the second phase, the steady calm. So I'm going to just have a picture for, okay, transition model. The neutral, I don't like this word, so I'm going to call it the messy middles. If your organization is in a messy middle right now, or if you are in a messy middle, I'm going to tell you that the anxiety in this phase is very high, and you or the organization is actually the most vulnerable in this phase. And the reason is you sometimes are going to want to run ahead and gain clarity before we've allowed the work to happen and the old things to be rooted out so that the new things could emerge. So you really require a leader, or if I can even talk about it, self-leadership in this stage, is the patient, calm, steadfastness. That is the kind of, I'm going to say, leader you can even be to yourself. There's a lot of anxiety, and we sometimes, I know for me, I want to sometimes gain clarity. And if an organization's hired me to work with them, you're paying me for clarity. But if I'm about discipleship, I am really going to want to allow the Lord to work and to root out the things that will not serve the new season. And that's a really important phase to pay attention to. The other thing worth noting, a phrase I would say to my team is, in transition, over communicate. Tell people what you're going to tell them, then tell them that you told them, and then start the whole thing again. Okay? Because for some reason, people, by the time we actually feel like we're repeating it, they've heard it for the first time. Now imagine you're in change, right? You got to keep people with you. And to be honest, if you're leading the organization, likely you've worked through all of this before they've even started here. Especially in ministry, because people come to church, and that's really, if we're really honest, they only think about church maybe once when they show up and if they're in a small group. You're living and breathing this. So just because you're here, pay attention. It doesn't mean all your people are in the same phase. So that's why I had you list some of the emotions, because that can sometimes help you. Oh, I'm hearing a lot of anxiety. We might be in, or I'm hearing a lot of grief. We might be in. Does that make sense to you? Yeah. Okay, so the third phase, this is the fun one because things are starting to come out. And that same thing about behaviors and habits, even in formational community, it's like, what can we do to reinforce this? But I think that a good question is this: what new story are we inviting people into? Now, you may already have that answer because that's likely, if you're the person who's pushing the change, sometimes you already know where you're going. But this is how you get ownership, where people go through with you. Because you know, sometimes like you're leading, people got to be close. If you get too far ahead, they feel like you're the enemy and they're going to shoot you. If we're really honest. So you got to stay close to your people. So in this kind of phase, you know, what stories could you tell? What symbols? What rituals? Like in our community, we did something called a Scottish dance, a Ceilidh. So every time there was like a celebration, we'd have a huge community dance. We'd mark it. We are intentionally, if you want to call them Ebenezer's personally, but this was our way. We would mark those changes. Okay, we are over time, so I'm going to just ask, what are some of your takeaways from today? It's just any takeaways or aha moments.
It's important to recognize where you are in the stage.
Yeah, it's important to know what phase you're in, right? Yeah.
I've never thought of
Yeah. Yeah. Because when you know where you are, then you can figure out where you want to go or where you want to move, right? Yeah. Anything else?
Don't rush for certainty.
Don't rush for certainty. All the leaders in the room. What else?
Handling the emotions is many times more important than handling the structural changes.
So good, yeah. The structure, and we like to be at the strategy, right? Yeah. It's as she prayed actually this morning, right? We like the what instead of the how, and we got to talk about the how. How are we going to be in this? Do you have a question, comment back there? There can be, yeah. You can allow yourself to rest in uncertainty. Yeah. Steve?
I think it's just so important to remember how much time we are dedicating as leaders versus how much, as you brought up, the people that are there, because that's like it's impossible to like move forward if we forget that piece. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think that you have to appropriately acknowledge what's ending and the losses that people are feeling.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to be really sensitive to that even at the start, because otherwise you're going to have a lot more resistance as you go.
Totally. And even if, this is the irony if we talk organizationally, even if a new leader or you're the new leaders coming in, those people are still grieving their old leader leaving, right? So yeah, us navigating our sheep and where they are versus where we are, we just have to be it requires such emotional and spiritual maturity. And that's, I think, the power of transition. Leadership, it allows us to mature, but I also think if we can disciple our people intentionally through it, we will end up with a more mature congregation or community. So I'm going to pray for all of you because you could tell there's some conversations. People are here because they're in change, so I just want to bless you in that. So let's pray together. Jesus, we're grateful that you know the way, and none of us are going, or communities are, there's nowhere that they're going that you haven't been, and nothing is a surprise to you. I just pray that your presence would go with us wherever we go, and that we would not attach ourselves or our security to the things that you're routing up in us in change, but will we become attached to you and where your presence leads us? Would you be close and would you be near? In Jesus' name.